Hello, it's Chris from Acrylic Pouring. I've had quite a few requests about how I mix my paints. Now I'm based in the UK and I know a lot of people use Floetrol and they're usually based in America. This is the British version, okay, and it's really expensive. This is approximately £21 and it's only 1 litre. So I use PVA glue. This is 5 litres and it costs £10. So the equivalent of this would cost about well over £100. And when you're looking at £10 versus over £100, you can see why a lot of people use PVA glue. It's non-washable. This is just a builder's brand. I get it from a DIY store. But that's why I use PVA glue. The advantages of PVA glue: it holds the cell shapes better. The disadvantages are you really have to make sure that when you're mixing, you are in a well ventilated area because the smell of this is very strong. So always make sure when you're mixing and when you're using your paints, you're in a well ventilated area. So that's why I use PVA glue. I've been using it for over 2 years. I get on fine. When I first started pouring, I was using this, but it was just way too expensive for me. So I make up my pouring medium and I use 70% of the PVA glue and I mix that with 30% water. I mix my pouring medium up in large batches. Now sometimes you can use 65% water, PVA and 35% water. You will find one that works for you, but with the paints I use, I tend to have my paints slightly thicker as well because of the techniques I'm doing. So I find that the 70% PVA glue with the 30% water works well for me. So I've got my pouring medium. And then I've got my acrylic paints. I use a various range of acrylic paints. I use a lot of the Pebeo. They have a wonderful iridescent range and their metallics are lovely. Amsterdam, the standard series I use a lot as well. And also the Daler Rowney paints, the graduate version. I mix my pouring medium with my acrylic paint on a 1-to-1 basis. So if I want, if I use 100 millilitres of acrylic paint, I will put 100 millilitres of the pouring medium in. I mix these together and then I will add water to get the consistency I want. Now there's loads of videos about consistency. Gina DeLuca has done a fantastic one. There are just so many different videos about pouring consistency. I'm mainly doing flip cups, so I have my consistency relatively thicker compared to a lot of people, especially with Dutch pours. Dutch pours are a lot thinner. So I'm just talking about how I mix my paints and my consistencies. I have a weighing scales. I weigh everything. Now, the reason why I do this is I mix up my paints in huge batches, and for our courses we need a lot of paint mix, so it's easier for me to start off with weighing my paints. So I always weigh the PVA, the pouring medium, to the paint. But when I add the water, I just do that by feel and eye. So because you get a feel for how things should be, but that's why I use a consistency test as well, which I'll come to later. So I weigh up the pouring medium and the paint, mix them together and then add the water by eye. So I'm going to show you how I mix my paints. This is a Pebeo iridescent metallic ancient gold. It's a beautiful colour and the tube says it's got 100 millilitres of paint in, so I'm going to weigh this. Now it doesn't matter if you're weighing in millilitres or grams or fluid ounces, you just need to be consistent. I give the tube a really good squeeze, and luckily with the Pebeo, even though they say they hold 100 millilitres, you usually can get a bit more out of them. And on this one I got 112 millilitres out. And I'm going to put in 112 of my pouring medium, so it's mixed on a 1-to-1 basis. So I'm going to mix these together. I paddle. I rotate the cup. I catch the edges. Sometimes I'll do a stir, but it's mainly paddling, and because I'm rotating the cup, it's Just making sure I get every area and I'm incorporating the paint. Paddle, 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 paddle. Stir. Do the edges. Now the Pebeo iridescent colours are a lot thicker than the other colours, and that's because the paints are denser. But you can see, very dense. This takes a lot of water when I'm mixing this up, but I still add it in bits. Extremely thick. So, water. So the mixing does take time. You want to make sure everything's fully incorporated. And it's paddling and stirring around the edges. I always try to mix my paints up the day before so it gives a chance for the paint to settle and the air bubbles to go. But if I'm mixing it up on the day I'm using it, I always try to leave at least an hour after I've mixed it before I pour, because you'll just get loads of bubbles in your pores. Okay, so that's like tar. You see there's a big pile there. And it's hardly dropping off the stirrer. So more water's needed. We mix up a lot of paint for our courses. So do this so often. So it's very thick. Leaving a huge trail. More water needed. It's like with everything, preparation is key. It's nothing worse than undermixed paint. It's a bit like if you're making a cake and you don't mix the flour in properly, you will get lumps. So it's worth spending time doing this stage properly. I love gold. See, that's really thick. So I'm going to just do a quick consistency test so you can see how thick it is, because it's almost not dropping off the stirrer. That's a big blob. And then I'm just going to let it run down and carry on mixing. See, so you can tell it's too thick because it's moving so slowly. So that's a pile on a pile on a pile. Way too thick. So I'm going to put some more water in. I'm making sure that the stirrer is always dragging along the bottom of the cup as well, so I'm not missing the bottom parts. So the tricky thing with metallics is you don't want them too thin, or else they lose their quality that makes them metallic. So they're always going to be slightly thicker than your other paints. However, you still want them runny enough to be able to pour. So a bit more water. Okay, this has actually run down the card, but I had put a huge blob on there and I knew it was I can feel it's too thick by the resistance as I'm moving my stirrer across. Something that you will just get to know the more you mix paint. Just going to put a bit more water in. And I think after this one, we should be good. I put quite a bit of water in there. I get too impatient, that's the problem. Oh, yeah, that's good. That is a huge blob. It was out of control. Let's just do a smaller one here. That's usually the size of blobs I do. Okay, let's see. And so I'm looking at how quickly it's running down. I need to stand it up though, upright. And while that's running, I'm going to carry on mixing. So you need to make sure everything is incorporated. And I'm happy with how it's running down the card. So I'm looking at how far it goes down, how quickly it actually runs, because obviously the longer you leave it, the more it's going to run. And my card, see, it's reached all the way down to the end, so I'm really happy with that. I'm very happy with how the gold has turned out, and when I lift up my stick you will see it leaves a little trail on the top, but I don't have huge piles of paint sitting on top of each other, so this is the consistency I'm looking for. I've got my bottle ready. Always put a marble in it. Helps agitate the paint, and then I'm just going to pour it in. I'm just going to show you how I do my consistency tests. Try to keep the blobs of paint roughly all the same size. That's probably a bit big. That looks thick. Can you see how slowly that was coming out? And that one was coming out really quickly. That's matching the red. These blobs are most probably a bit too big. I've included this last paint because I know it's way too thin, so you can see what happens when it's really, really running. Okay, watch them run. That one I know is too thin, but the rest of them are looking quite good. I've sped up this section of the video, and this took actually a minute for the paint to run down. So you saw that one absolutely zoom down. Now if I use that in a pour with these other colours, that would just take over everything and mix with everything too much. These ones are absolutely fine. Now I know this one's shorter and this one's shorter, but these are looking good. If I was going to pour this, I would put a bit more of the red in and the grey if I wanted it to show up more. Or alternatively, I could thin it by adding some water, let it sit for an hour, and then pour with it. You don't have to have them all exactly the same length to pour, but you have to realise there's consequences if you don't take notice of what's happening on this test. This one, like I said, is running too much, and I wouldn't use it. You could thin all these to match that, but you're going to have a pour where the paints are really going to mix together a lot. And with my flip cups, you need the paints relatively thick. To thin paint, you just add water bit by bit. It's easier to thin paint than to thicken paint. If I wanted to thicken this, I would decant it into a cup, and I would add more paint and a bit more PM, but I would add that in a small cup, add some of the paint into it, mix it together, and then add it to the big cup. That's the best way to thicken it, and it's a real pain to thicken paint. It's easier to thin paint than it is to thicken. So I always keep my pours, my bottles, the paint in them slightly thicker, so when I come to use them I can thin them if I want to. Now everyone has different tests that they use, and this is just the one I use. I find it really helpful. I was hoping to include in this tutorial video how to custom mix colours, but I ran out of space. It would have made this video way too long. So the next tutorial video I'll be releasing will be how to mix custom colours. Please remember that there are so many different ways to mix your paints and different recipes, but this video is just showing you how I do my mixing. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you want to see further videos, please do subscribe. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.